Welcome, Dr. Julia Galvez Delgado, Professor, Vice Chair of Pediatric Anesthesiology at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and Division Chief of Pediatric Anesthesiology at the Children's Hospital and Medical Center of Omaha, Nebraska. I am so glad to have you here today. For those of us who may not know you very well, can you please give us a brief summary about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. It's really great to be here. I'm a pediatric anesthesiologist. I'm a parent of three awesome children. And if I'm very quirky, I'm a computer nerd and love everything that has to do with computer information technology, medicine, life in general. And when I'm not doing those things, I do like to do a lot of fitness. I've transitioned from marathon running to yoga, meditation, and sometimes unicycling. That's where I'm at.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing and thank you for joining us today. So we'll get started on our questions. So looking back at your younger self, did you think you would be the division chief at a pediatric medical center?
It's a great question. I can definitely say I did not think I would ever be in this situation, this position, having this opportunity. I distinctly remember actually meeting with one of my mentors within the first few years of my career, kind of talking about long-term goals. And at the time, that's when I was establishing my clinical practice and getting a master's degree in clinical informatics, and kind of had my sights set on really developing this expertise. So when I was asked, like, if I was, if I had any aspirations or goals to be a leader in this capacity, a chief or chair or anything like that, I just remember having an immediate reaction of like, no, absolutely not. And just I just couldn't believe that they would even ask me that question. I was like, no, that's the other people do that stuff, like not me.
Uh, oh, thank you for sharing that. uh, so tell me how you became interested in medical informatics.
So I mean, for me, it really just goes back to childhood. I mean, as far as back as I can remember, I was always around computers. Both of my parents are engineers, electrical engineers. So I grew up in Venezuela, and not only my parents were engineers, but all of my aunts and uncles were either engineers or something to do with computer technology. At the time, this is in the 80s and even the 90s. So dating myself. And so I just was always around computers. And as I kind of pursued a career in medicine, it just seemed like there was a big gap. Everybody was doing paper records. In my internship, I was still going around looking for actual film x-rays and things like that, writing paper notes, paper orders, and all that stuff. So, it for me growing up in medicine, the idea that computers and medical practice could be brought together wasn't immediately apparent. And I just was always looking for those opportunities to bring those two things together, and was fortunate to kind of connect with a group of people that not only supported me through mentorship, but also my own colleagues who I ended up kind of taking the journey together with into this space, as I essentially grew up in transitioned from training to attending hood.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's so funny. I used to have to write all my notes by hand too when I was an intern.
Yeah,
And used
I
a
mean,
little paper flag that
yeah,
a new order
yeah.
was put in.
Oh my gosh, that, and how many times you had to walk up and downstairs to see if the X-ray was in the ICU or in the emergency room, or the EKG sheet or things like that.
Yes,
I spent a lot of time doing that on call, or just even regular days.
yes.
But I think for me, one of the things about clinical informatics is I knew I found my people when I learned about the fundamental theorem of clinical informatics. And this is something that was introduced, I mean, it seems like a long time ago, but in 2009 by
Mm-hmm.
Charles Friedman. It's essentially said that a person working in partnership with an information resource is better than the same person unassisted,
Mm-hmm.
and that information resource, you can substitute that with a computer device, some kind of technology, right? And sometimes the computers, or when you add those things, it seems to actually move it in the opposite direction, meaning I could do a better job without the computer. Certainly, sometimes they feel like they get in our way, but that's one of the things that drives me. How do we actually meaningfully put things together so that they actually can help us to be better?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Can you expand on what motivated you? Because you initially said you would never consider being division chief of anything. Um, what motivated you, and how did you decide to actually become the division chief of pediatric anesthesia at the University of Nebraska?
It's a good question. You know, the it, for me, I was at first I wasn't even looking for the position. It's something that I was approached for.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, probably one of the biggest honors of my life. And if someone that you've worked with, not necessarily clinically, but you've worked with an individual over years, and that person says, "Hey, I'm on the search committee for the division chief at my institution. Would you consider coming here and being a chief and vice chair at my institution?" Um, that was the first thing that kind of opened my eyes to like the possibility, and if I had found that if I had learned about this position a different way, I'm not sure that I was in the mindset that I would have really at that particular time, and to put it into context as well, all of this happened right within weeks of the COVID pandemic becoming a reality of the world. So we're talking March of 2020 is when this information kind of came to me. And I so that was the first thing. I got a nudge from someone within my respected network of peers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it when it came to actually making that decision of like walking away from something that I had worked so hard to build and develop, I mean, you kind of have a career, and like now what? Like, are you going to really just switch gears? Um, I was really inspired and motivated by the people in here in Omaha. The I mean, they're really phenomenal faculty and staff. The more that I got to know them, the more I got to know about the organization, the work ethic, the culture, the more impressed I was. And this opportunity to make a difference seemed to make more sense for me. And so it was a gradual process, and
Mm-hmm.
that's sort of the way it was for me. I think I've definitely met people who have more of a clear vision of like, I've always wanted to be a leader. This is exactly how I'm going to do it, and I don't think I quite fit into that mold.
Mm-hmm. 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 So interestingly, from interviewing the other women on this series, there's been several who went into leadership the way you have, in that they were nudged by someone else, and then they kind of were like, "Oh, okay," like somehow it opened their mind to like think about it and then go for it. So.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. I've seen both ways from talking to the other uh, other women. So
Mm-hmm.
thanks for sharing your experience.
Yeah.
Tell me how you were able to publish as extensively as you have with limited time and resources.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it takes a village, you know. It's, I think, you know, this this role, like trying to be a physician scientist, just as it's evolved, really has it that path has a lot of challenges. And for me, it became even more pronounced at a time when my wife had a pretty severe injury that kind of changed our lives overnight. And, I mentioned I have 3 kids, and, that particular event happened at a time when my productivity was expected to actually increase. And this is just going for promotion at a if within the realm of the promotion structure of the system that I was at. And, looking at like that, I highlight that example because it, when I look back on it, like we were able to survive as a family and as an individual with community support, and that's community. I mean, the people in our neighborhood, the people at work that were, either covering shifts or just helping out with whatever the needs were, people literally coming out of the woodworks. When it came to actual publications and things like that, if you look at my CV, you actually can't tell that there was a gap in productivity. And that, again, all stems from that community, just being part of a larger family of people that really can collaborate and work synergistically together. That's really the way that I have evolved in my career and my journey. When I came back into academics, one of the big factors that shaped my decision was that I knew I wanted to do clinical informatics work, and that's something that at the time, a lot of healthcare organizations were really looking to invest in. But I didn't want to be the one person in that institution doing the work. I wanted to be able to have partners, peers that I would be able to work with, and that partnership really grew over time. And the philosophy that I cannot take credit for, but was part of the team, and this one I can credit Dr. Alan Simpao is for introducing it, even though he politely and humbly says that he didn't introduce it to the team. But this idea that the rising tide helps all the ships to go up, there's enough work for everyone. There's enough really for everyone to benefit as far as contributions and things like that. So just with that mindset, how do we collaborate? How do we create something bigger than us?
That's awesome. That's awesome that you were able to find a research community like that. Not all of us are able to find that within our own organization. So that's awesome. What recommendations do you have for others who are trying to embark in a research career as a physician scientist?
I mean, I think it's in today's world, and I mean, it's one of the things that I've really shaped how I've entered into this next chapter of my life as a leader in Nebraska at Children's and at the university, is to identify mechanisms to support the individuals, but so the reason I'm highlighting this and focusing on junior faculty is that, as a junior faculty, I often was not sure what I could ask for, what help I could ask for from my own leaders. And I can tell you that, I wish I had more people asking me for help, because if you ask me for help, I could help you. And, may not be exactly the way that a person wants to be helped. I mean, sometimes, it's not possible to organize things in a way that every individual is satisfied, but again, this philosophy that each person isn't alone, and identifying those communities, they could be within your own department, but not necessarily within your own department. Many of the mentors that I've developed, that I've established, have been outside of the anesthesia departments that I've worked at, and some of them even outside of anesthesiology as a field. They may have been in the same institution or not, and we can talk a little bit about how to even navigate that process, but being really open-minded about where to ask for help in developing your own network and community. Those are the things that I would recommend to anyone. The communities are definitely out there.
Yes, at my home institution, when I first went, we didn't really have a very much support system for research or anything like that. And so I was lucky that got connected with others through the Society of Pediatric Anesthesia, and was able to join research groups and participate in a lot of the registries. And that has really helped me join a research community in that sense. So everyone can find a way, just looking for it and asking people to point you in the right direction. So I totally agree with you. Which leadership roles and skills would you encourage early career anesthesiologists to pursue?
I mean, there's so many answers to that question, right? I mean, there's no one size fits all sort of approach. I think really, I tend to be pretty open-minded when it comes to so even just defining what does success mean, right? I mean, we get to really define that for ourselves, and even the definition of that changes over time. Individuals may have priorities shift as at different stages of their life for every reason that you can imagine, right? And the idea that there's this path that people have to follow, like, oh, so and so did it this way, but I'm struggling to make that same path work for me. Well, that's okay. Like there's lots of different ways to navigate the world. I think just being sensitive with the times, and some the last couple of years have, with social isolation and all the things that the world has been experiencing. I think that if I had to invest in something right now, is just in interpersonal communication, emotional intelligence, EQ, those sort of aspects. I think that's something that really just can serve in so many areas, in both the day-to-day, like our lives in the operating room, community, all of the areas that we have. I'm a little biased towards informatics related things, so there's definitely a lot of anything that has to do with clinical informatics, device development engineering, really opens up the world of possibilities. And I think it's interesting that in anesthesia, like we tend to actually undervalue our own ability to enter into that space, but the reality is that every anesthesiologist essentially functions as a universal translator in the hospital, right? You can talk to pediatricians, to internists, to radiologists, to surgeons, to administrators, kind of get them to understand each other, nurses, I mean, like anybody, you name the person, and we really do interact with people in the entire hospital. And when it comes to innovation, development of health systems or things like that, like essentially you need the people who are developing the systems to understand the clinical problems that are trying to be solved. That's what we're good at doing. We're good at explaining these things, and that's I think it's a really fruitful area to explore for people.
Yeah. Yeah, I actually took what is it, the 10 by 10 OSU uh,
Mhm.
biomedical informatics course. And I really liked it. It was very interesting. And I was felt like, oh, especially as the anesthesiologist, that we are so in tune with monitoring and all the monitors that we use. And I was like, oh, we're kind of like a computer, right? Like we have to interpret all this information and spit it out and come up with something. So I was like, I could see easy, how there's a place for anesthesiologists in informatics and biomedical informatics. So it's
Mhm.
not, um, definitely a good area to explore.
No, and obviously there's um, lots of different paths, you know. I That's the expertise that I have. But I've also, it's interesting, it really overlaps with so many areas, you know, whether like right now, bioinformatics or just looking, that's an interesting distinction. So there's biomedical and then bioinformatics. And the way I kind of think of it is biomedical is, you know, anything to do with electronic health record and like patient kind of facing applications. Bioinformatics, it's more of like the biology, particularly genomics. If you think of like that entire field of everything that's on all of the data rich world of genome sequencing and analysis and everything else. So like that's a whole nother area. But like those two have a fair amount of overlap, um, especially as you go into the basic sciences um, and everything. So, you know, it this really could trans this skill set really does touch quite a lot of areas. Um,
Mm-hmm. Hmm. As you mentioned, you hold a secondary degree in master's in medical informatics. Um, what is your perspective on obtaining a secondary degree for those who may be contemplating getting one?
sure. I mean, I think it's I mean, I'm one person, right? Like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
it's I can speaking to just my own story, you know, like at the time that I obtained this degree, I was already on the faculty. So like it was after completing fellowships and everything else. And, you know, had three small kids in the house. So a lot of my work happened after they went to bed, you know, after
Mm-hmm.
9 o'clock at night or so. And, you know, the coursework was set up. This particular degree was set up with the working provider, healthcare provider in mind. And I say that broadly because informatics degrees really are there's many people who get these that aren't even in medicine. Um, and but it was something that fit within my schedule, you know. And I know that that looks different for a lot of different programs. Sometimes it's an requires more on-site course, but it is, I think, a worthwhile investment in yourself, and the primary investment being time. You know, there's also cost that you have to consider, but often organizations are also interested in investing in people. So for me, I was able to actually get the tuition cost covered by my employer, which the stipulation was that I would have to work for them for longer. For every there was like it was almost like being in the army with the army loan repayment type things. And I was like, so you're telling me that I'll have job security, so I'll have my job for longer with you if I do this degree. Okay, that sounded like a good deal. So at least that took the financial pressure off, but the time investment really becomes the primary thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I do have to say that it's been very useful to me over the last 10 years, in just giving me a broader perspective. And I have many colleagues have pursued degrees in education or business administration and things like that. And I feel like everybody does get some benefit out of those degrees. Um, you know, and but it's not always readily apparent, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
Um,
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. It's a personal choice to go get it. And sometimes you do see the fruits of getting it, and sometimes you might not recognize it for a little longer. So,
I
um,
want to say for me, probably if you were going to look at it from that standpoint, I mean, I finished a degree probably like in 2014 or 15, around that time, I forget, but
mhm,
it didn't seem to make much of a difference until people started recruiting me for jobs and things like that. And then that's when that was the thing that was setting me apart.
mhm,
So 5 to 10 years later, right? Which
mhm,
after graduating and stuff. And so um, it is helpful in that context, but I find actual use to the skills that I learned on day-to-day life. So like for me, I've definitely, I feel like I've used it.
mhm, mhm. Looking back at your career, what is the most helpful career advice you have received?
I received advice about not being afraid to fail or make mistakes.
Mhm,
Um, and I think that, it, we tend when I say that, like the place that my mind goes to is in the operating room, taking care of kids and stuff. And like, I definitely don't want to make a mistake, right? And all of
uh,
us are very type A OCD when it comes to how we take care of our kids, like, and I
uh-huh,
take that super seriously. But the reality is that we're human and we do make mistakes, right? Mistakes happen all the time. And so in the clinical environment, it looks a certain way, but like also like taking a big step back and just looking at life in general, like life direction, career direction, advice, like in that context, where the stakes, may not be as readily apparent because you don't have like this baby in front of you, right? But there's still big items at stake, right? It's your life, you
mhm,
know. I oftentimes that fear of making a mistake can be paralyzing and can keep us from actually doing the thing that we need to do, you
mhm,
know.
yeah,
And I've and thinking about it some more too, like this there's this concept I've been learning a little bit more about, which is it's like failure immunity,
mhm,
and it's not to say that you don't fail. Actually, failing is a learning opportunity, right? And we always learn from failing. And if you start looking at failures as ways to figure out maybe, okay, that this was not the path, but what is the path, right? If you're thinking of walking through, I see you standing in front of a very beautiful woods back there. I might want to get across those woods to the other side, and I don't know where the path is, and I'll start trying, and I'll find lots of paths that don't make it through, right? But at some point, and then you learn information from that, right? I mean, they can be
mhm,
frustrating, it can be hard, and everything else, but you know where the path isn't, right?
mhm,
And and I remember this message has kind of come up over the years in different modes. And there was one lecturer at the Society for Technology and Anesthesia, Sam Lampatang. He's an engineer and professor at the University of Florida, so not far from you.
yeah,
Um, and I remember, he has like more than 200 patents. Like,
mhm,
I mean, something that I don't even understand how a person can do. Uh, but he talked about for every one of those patents, like there was, an exponentially higher number of failed ideas. And this interesting concept that like businesses actually pay for that knowledge. So the
mhm,
more failures you have under your belt, like that actually becomes really useful information for many other people, right?
mhm,
So how do you turn failures into a learning opportunity? And essentially, going back to what I said, don't be afraid to fail because you can always take something from it.
mhm, mhm. That's great advice. It is sometimes paralyzing, as you mentioned, that fear. But you do learn a lot in those moments. For sharing your story. It's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you for being you.
Mm. Thank you for hosting me and for your time as well.
Thank you.